Throughout history, no one has been more admired, debated, worshipped, or misunderstood than Jesus of Nazareth. People built religions in his name, yet often ignored his words. They crowned him King of Kings, but he never sought a throne. They preached his death while missing the truth of his life. Even during his own time, the people closest to him, his family, his disciples, his nation, saw him through a veil of expectation. They expected a conqueror, not a comforter, a Messiah with an army, not a man with a towel and basin. According to the Urantia Book, this misunderstanding was not an accident. It was the inevitable result of divine truth meeting limited human perception. When infinite love walks among finite minds, misunderstanding is almost guaranteed. To understand why Jesus was misunderstood, we must first see the world he entered. In first century Palestine, religion had become a matter of ritual, not revelation. The God of love had been buried beneath laws, sacrifices, and hierarchies. The Jewish people awaited a Messiah of political deliverance, someone who would overthrow Rome and restore Israel's power. So when Jesus appeared, gentle, compassionate, unconcerned with politics, they couldn't reconcile him with their prophecies. They saw his miracles, but missed his meaning. They heard his words, but filtered them through nationalism and fear. He offered freedom of the soul, and they asked for freedom from taxes. He offered truth, and they wanted vengeance. As Urantia puts it, he came proclaiming spiritual liberty, but men desired political power. And so, the world's greatest revelation began with the world's greatest misunderstanding. Even his closest companions struggled to grasp who he really was. His family thought he was unbalanced, too consumed by idealism. The apostles, despite living at his side, kept expecting a decisive act of power. Peter wanted action. James wanted authority. Judas wanted recognition. Jesus kept teaching that the kingdom of heaven was not an empire of men, but a state of the heart. But centuries of expectation don't dissolve easily. When he spoke of spiritual sovereignty, they heard political prophecy. When he talked about the Father's love, they waited for the trumpet of war. It wasn't until long after his death that they began to realize he hadn't failed their hopes. Their hopes had failed to recognize him. The tragedy of misunderstanding was not that Jesus was rejected, it was that he was misinterpreted. After his resurrection, his followers, desperate to preserve his legacy, built a religion around his personality, not his philosophy. The divine messenger became the message itself. They remembered his miracles more than his meanings. They canonized his suffering, but often ignored his joy. The world ended up worshiping the man while losing touch with the mission. He didn't come to be adored from afar. He came to teach humanity how to live as sons and daughters of God. But even today, that truth remains hidden behind centuries of doctrine, dogma, and division. One of the greatest paradoxes of history is this: Jesus did not teach a religion about himself. He taught a way of life like himself. His message was about the Father, about sonship, about the living experience of knowing God personally. Yet, after his death, his followers, who loved him deeply and sincerely, elevated the messenger over the message. They preached salvation through belief about Jesus rather than transformation through the life of Jesus. Jesus never said, "Worship me." He said, "Follow me. Walk as I walk. Love as I love. Live as I live." But humanity made him the center rather than the example. It's easier to worship a figure than to imitate a life. And so the gospel shifted from spiritual experience to theological belief, a move that continues to shape Christianity today. Jesus taught that the Father is loving, forgiving, and ever-present within each soul. But many religious systems built after him emphasized fear. Fear of judgment, fear of punishment, fear of God. How did love become fear? Urantia explains, humanity projected its own spiritual insecurity onto God. A fearful heart imagines a fearful deity. A world accustomed to kings and armies imagined a God enthroned like Caesar. And so Jesus, who taught liberty of the Spirit, was recast into a framework of constraint and obedience. The giver of freedom became a symbol of control. His message of inner God consciousness was overshadowed by doctrines of guilt, sacrifice, and authority. He brought good news, but the world inherited mixed messages. Today, Jesus is still misunderstood, just in new ways. Some reduce him to a myth. Others weaponize his name for politics, culture wars, or personal power. Still, others admire him, but do not study him, do not listen to him, do not imitate him. Millions believe in Jesus, but not the Jesus he revealed himself to be. They believe in the Jesus of tradition, of doctrine, of inherited stories, not the Jesus who said, "The kingdom is within you." Not the Jesus who taught freedom of the soul, not the Jesus who revealed God as Father, not ruler. Not the Jesus who said love is greater than law. The Urantia Book insists that Jesus has not been rejected. He has been obscured, even by those who claim to speak for him. It matters because Jesus did not come to establish a religion. He came to reveal a way of living that could reshape humanity. He showed us that God is intimate, not distant, present, not hidden, within, not above. As long as Jesus is misunderstood, that revelation waits unopened. Humanity suffers when love is replaced with fear, when doctrine replaces experience, when worship replaces imitation. To rediscover Jesus is not to reject tradition. It is to go beyond it, deeper into what he truly taught. That God is love, that we are his children, that the kingdom is here, now, within. We misunderstand Jesus when we think believing in him is the goal. The goal was never belief. The goal was transformation. The Urantia Book offers a striking perspective, not to replace Jesus, but to restore him, to peel away centuries of interpretation and return to the living teacher who walked the hills of Galilee. Jesus came not to die for humanity, but to live for humanity, to reveal the Father, to show what it means to be a child of God, to illuminate the path of love, service, and inner transformation. But history focused on the crucifixion more than the life. It centered on his death instead of his revelation. The world remembered the sacrifice. The world forgot the reason for it. Urantia says plainly, the religion of Jesus is the most powerful influence that has ever touched human life, yet it has rarely been tried. Not misunderstood because he was unclear, but because his clarity was too vast for the age that received it. Jesus said his kingdom was not of this world, and the world misinterpreted it. People expected armies. He preached brotherhood. They wanted revolution. He taught forgiveness. They envisioned a throne. He washed feet. The mismatch was not in his message. It was in the expectations of those who heard it. Even today, many still wait for force where he offered love, for judgment where he offered mercy, for outward signs where he whispered inward truth. Jesus did not come to rule nations. He came to rule hearts through freedom, not force. A kingdom built not by law, but by love. Jesus is misunderstood now for the same reason he was 2,000 years ago. His teaching demands inner change, not external compliance. It asks us to forgive where ego wants revenge, to love where fear wants control, to trust where doubt wants certainty. It is easier to worship Jesus than to resemble him, easier to praise his sacrifice than to live his compassion, easier to build doctrines than to build character. Jesus didn't come to be admired. He came to be followed, not iconized, but internalized, not distant, but indwelling, not above us, but within us. This generation stands at a turning point. For the first time in centuries, countless seekers are asking not, what do people say about Jesus, but rather, who was he really? What did he actually teach? What did he intend? We return to his words, not commentary. We turn to his life, not just his death. We rediscover his Father, our Father, not as judge, but as source of living love. Urantia calls this the second great revelation of the Son, not a return of the man, but a return of his message. Jesus was misunderstood then. He is misunderstood now, but he does not ask for recognition. he asks for realization. To understand him is not to memorize theology, but to embody truth, to live as he lived, to forgive as he forgave, to love as he loved. His kingdom is not coming. It is happening within each soul who dares to awaken. And so the question remains, not who is Jesus to the world, but who is Jesus within you? When that answer becomes personal, misunderstanding dissolves and revelation begins.